Well, in recent weeks, we've seen a disturbing trend right across the West. Previously sympathetic Western governments, Europe, Britain, even the States, are beginning to turn against Israel. What is going on? Joining us to discuss this, great thinker, great man. You can see him often on Rita Panahi's show, but he was here in this very studio 6 years ago. Great author, great friend, Douglas Murray. Great to have you back in the Outsiders studio,
Great
Douglas.
to be back.
You've been, you're here in Australia. You're appearing tonight at the Enmore Theatre with Josh Zepps. He's another fantastic guy. That'll be absolute must-watch. In uncomfortable conversations, something you've had many of recently. One in particular I want to ask you about what's going on with David Cameron in particular and Israel. Your reporting from both Gaza and Israel in the aftermath of October 7th was superb. Let me just say that. Absolutely ahead of the rest of the world. It was absolutely riveting, and the job you did was absolutely stunning. You were recently in South Africa, so I just want to play a bit of this clip, which was just such great viewing, and you can tell us. So you were arguing about the ethics of, the conflict. Just have a look at this debate.
Our views might differ, but the facts are the facts, and I want to pick you up on something you just did.
I'm interviewing you.
I know, but
Yes.
I think you're uninformed.
No.
So let me just. You are uninformed
Oh,
because
really?
first of all,
Yes.
you didn't say that Egypt is blockading Gaza. Secondly, you claim that Israel.
I'm talking about
let me
Israel
finish
here,
the
and
point.
I want to move.
It's
I want
very
to move on
convenient
from
for
this.
you to mention Israel
Oh.
because you've clearly got an animus here.
Israel is making people more and more increasingly militant. So what is happening at the moment?
Israel's making people more militant.
Is not working.
Do you
All
think
right,
that Hamas
let's
is
go
making
back-
people more militant or not?
Let's go back to the ICJ.
Do you think that Hamas is making
statement.
people more militant or not?
Well, it's a catch-22.
Oh,
isn't
I
it?
see.
So, Douglas, why does the West, so many people in the West, struggle with this moral equivalency? They can't see the difference between the horrors and the evil of October 7th and the necessary self-defence that's taking place in Gaza. Why is the West so conflicted or confused?
Well, I'm not sure that lady in question represents the West. She's a South African journalist who, it turns out, used to work for Al Jazeera. So when she said, she said to me, I used to live in the region, and then I worked out, Doha from the Al Jazeera studios, where even on a clear day you can't see Gaza. So she's not emblematic, but she might be emblematic of a type of person in the West who just, everything's always got to be about the Israeli response. It's never on the initial crime that's committed, you know. These are people who, to coin a phrase, always mix up the firefighter and the fire. You know, Hamas started a war, and there's consequences for starting a war, in my view. And there is no law of war or nature that says you can start a war, massacre innocent civilians in their homes, kill young people at a rave, and then the moment you start to lose the war that results, say, actually, look, let's hang off, guys, let's call it a draw. No such thing. And actually, as one of the members of the War Cabinet in Israel the other day said, Benny Gantz, there is no point in putting out 3/4 of a fire. You either put the fire out or you don't. You don't put out a bit of the fire and then leave it burning. Extinguish the whole thing or there's no point. And in the case of Gaza, extinguishing the whole thing is destroying Hamas completely, making sure they are never again operationally capable.
And yet David Cameron, the British, are already talking about arms embargoes to Israel. David Cameron, British Foreign Minister.
Hang on, Lord Cameron to you and me.
Lord Cameron, I'm sorry, Douglas. And Joe Biden, similar thing around Europe. They're putting a lot of, they seem to basically be saying to Netanyahu, in the case of Chuck Schumer, you leave, which is disgraceful. But in the case of Cameron, don't finish off the job.
Yeah, by the way, I mean, the amazing thing with the Americans pressuring Israel is that the Democrats are pressuring Israel because they believe that the conflict could have a result in dampening down some of the vote, mainly in Minnesota, I think, in November this year. That's pretty weird. I mean, if I don't know, America was at war And, this country, Australia, is a great ally of America. But if your government were to call up the Americans and say, now, look, I know you've got a war on and you're defending your people and everything like that, but our polling's not great in Adelaide, so would you mind stopping? I mean, who would do that? Who would do that? If Benjamin Netanyahu called up David Cameron and said, now, look, we don't agree with British foreign policy on some stuff and our polling's bad in Caesarea, well, what kind of a way is this to act? So the first thing is, the Americans are doing it for some rather cynical and short-term domestic political reasons. But the David Cameron one, Lord Cameron, sorry. The Lord Cameron one is very, very strange. He has, I have to say, always had a pretty negative attitude towards Israel, in my view. In 2006, when he was Conservative Party leader, he said Gaza was a concentration camp. I mean, it's obscene, absolutely obscene. What concentration camp has beach resorts and free trade and workers coming in and out to work in neighbouring? Anyhow, look, I thought at the time, OK, he's an ignoramus. He'll learn, he'll grow up. It turns out that, we're in this situation now. He's been brought back as foreign minister by Rishi Sunak, who needs some stabilisers on his rather unstable tricycle. and here he is saying all these things to Israel about how it should behave. And I have a pretty straightforward one to this, which is I want to hear not very much from a British Foreign Secretary giving advice to Israel, as long as the Foreign Office in Britain continues to have utterly insane views towards Israel. And I'll give you one very quickly if I can. The Golan Heights, as you know, strategically incredibly important, captured by Israel 50 years ago, part of Israel, one of the most beautiful bits and one of the most advantageous bits for any enemy of Israel to be on. The official government policy of Britain is that is occupied territory. Now, look, the only person you could give the Golan Heights to is Bashar al-Assad, who's killed about 700,000 Muslims in Syria in the last decade. I mean, it's true that maybe he needs a little bit more ground, in his view, to kill people on, but the idea the British Foreign Secretary holds to a view that the Golan Heights should be given to the Assad regime of Syria is, in my view, insane. And until the British Foreign Office sorts out things like that, I treat all the advice they give with more than a pinch of salt.
Rita.
I'm interested in your views on what's happening in Australia. You wrote recently about Sweden, their left-wing government having mass migration and having all sorts of unintended consequences, going from this peaceful paradise to a country now. I think Sweden's the second most bombed country that is not at war. They've got bombs going off all over the place. And we've got a left-wing government in now. We've just had more than 500,000 net migrants come in a year. It's an incredible surge to previous years. What do we need to be mindful of, and what lessons are there from Sweden, which really had an open border policy different to what we've seen in Australia?
Yes, no, it's amazing, Rita. I mean, as you say, this is... in 2015, the Swedes opened their borders. They said it's incredibly important to be open-hearted and generous to the world and so on. But what they did was, as we just heard in the previous segment, they did what a lot of governments have been doing. You effectively punish people who come to our countries legally. You punish them and you incentivize people who break the rules and come illegally. And that's happening everywhere, from Sweden to America to Britain and Australia. It's an astonishing mistake. But yes, I mean, as Rita says, you have this crazy situation. Like Sweden, do you remember the old days? We all used to talk about Sweden, always a Scandinavian option for everything. Anything in life could be improved by referring to Scandinavia. People would say, oh, well, the Swedish this, the Danish that, whether it was a hot drink or a way to feel good or a policy. It was always about Scandinavia. And then, as you say, Rita, you get this situation where you have now Sweden, the second largest number of bombings of any country not officially at war, only after Mexico. Only after Mexico. And if I'd have said to you 10 years ago, what do you think about when you think about Sweden? Like me, you'd have probably said, well, I know, hot drinks, overpriced food, but nice people, or rather cold. You wouldn't have said, oh, grenade attacks. The traditional Swedish grenade attack. Never forget the intrinsic importance to our culture of grenades. And but that's the case because they just didn't care about who they let in, and it meant that they were letting in military-aged males who very often lied about their age. And, none of this, there are legitimate asylum seekers in the world. Those people are completely stripped of their capabilities and their rights. When you allow, as I've seen this in Sweden myself, big bearded guys in their 20s who say, oh, I'm a child migrant, allowed into a school and so on, and they just lose control of everything. But, that's the thing with the migration issue. All of our countries in the developed world are struggling with this. There are millions upon millions of people in the world who want to come to relatively safe, liberal, democratic countries like this one, like Britain, like America, like European countries. And the question is, are we able to step up to that challenge and actually bring in people at a reasonable rate, or is that too difficult for our politicians?
Great question. James.
Well, Douglas, I want to pick up on that theme here because it seems like a whole big part of the problem here is that in the West, in countries, whether it's Sweden or Scandinavia or England or America or Australia, there's a real problem now, about talking about the values that we have as either individual nations or as, a broader society. And it's like we've lost any sort of ability. We're now squeamish about talking about that. In Australia, you can only talk about the immigration issue in the context of housing and the economy. If you get out of that zone, it starts to be a third rail. Have we lost the ability? Is it too late for us now to get that back? Because it seems to me where this all goes, Douglas, is that you wind up being so liberal, so tolerant that you import an awful lot of people who don't necessarily come because they want to subscribe to these values, but maybe impose a different set of values. What happens then to the West? Is it too late? How do we get back this solid ground, which I think is ground that's not racist, but it is something that is to be proud of and to be cherished, because once we lose it, we don't get a liberal society back.
Well, that's right. I mean, we know, James, don't we? We know the values of this. We know the reason why people come to our countries. There is no movement the other way. I mean, I always say when the boats were coming to Australia with illegals from other parts of this region, it wasn't like they met boats the other way of Aussies desperately trying to flee the oppressive, conservative or otherwise government in Australia. The movement is always one way. I mean, you don't even get people moving from Britain to France on the boats. It's always France to Britain. People want to move up through Europe. When people cross the Rio Grande, when these Mexican cartels and others take very, very beleaguered people who've given their life savings to horrible, horrible criminal gangs, you don't find a bunch of Texans saying they want to flee to the freedom of Ecuador. Now, my point on that is, therefore, we should have the courage to say, look, at the very least, we must be doing something right. There must be something we're doing right.
It's our pronouns, the use of our pronouns. That
I know. It's all of that for sure. I forgot I didn't check your pronouns beforehand, James, but I let me guess them. But it's a very strange thing, and as you said it before, we've got this situation where you can talk about it in economic terms, you can talk about it in housing terms, but the larger cultural terms are still a third rail. And I'm astonished that after all of these years, we've known the issues of immigration and integration for many years. I'm amazed that we're still in all of our countries at this very, very toddler stage of the debate. It shouldn't be that hard to say, look, if you want to come to Australia, you want to become part of Australia, you've got something to give to this country, and you will give to this country, and you want to be part of it, fantastic. Join the queue and let's see what we can do. But if it's the case that you want to come here and you don't really like the place, or you want to change the place, or you want to change the place back to the sort of place where the place you left from, and maybe some of the reasons why you left, then maybe that's not going to be a workable deal. I don't think that's so difficult.
It's not difficult. It's common sense to you, it's common sense to your fans, it's common sense to most people, but not to our political leaders. And why have we got in Britain, you had the House of Commons the other day actually intimidated, harassed to the point of changing the rules by Islamists.
Well, that was an amazing scene. Yes, I mean, effectively a mob outside of Parliament affected the workings of Parliament in Westminster. But, you know, the really interesting thing on that is the politicians, even after that happened, couldn't identify who had been doing the threatening. They couldn't identify it. They talk about it, all of our politicians do that, they talk about these amorphous things like, you know, we must stand against hate. OK, like, and then what? Like, and who? Like, get specific. Who were the group outside Parliament? Who was it projecting slogans onto Big Ben whilst the democracy is at work and our representatives are meant to be voting? Who is it that our representatives feel a threat from? You know, and this can go wrong really fast if you don't identify it. I mean, you know, our politicians should be frank. Are they feeling terrible threats and changes to their voting processes because of people from Wales? Or is it like people who is it the people who live and work in Chinatown? You know, is that a place that members of Parliament shouldn't go? Let's be specific about it. And they cannot be. And even in Britain, and Rita and I have spoken about this before, even in Britain, when another of our MPs was murdered a couple of years ago by a jihadist, even then, his colleagues couldn't identify the ideology that had killed their colleague. They talked about him as if he died of natural causes. And I think they do a great dishonour not just to their murdered colleague and to themselves, but to the public when they can't be open and honest about that. You know, I think broadly speaking, a lot of our politicians treat us like we are incredibly febrile, easily riled up, dangerous mobs. You know, they don't trust the public. And I mean, I don't know, this is your country. I'm a mere visitor, but it seems to me that the average Australian is a level-headed and decent sort of person. Same thing with the British public, same thing with the American public. We're not deplorables. We're not easily riled, you know, violent gangs. You know, we're the public. And they treat us with this incredible disdain and suspicion and indeed fear. And that's one of the things that causes them to be, you know, sort of timid, don't say anything, can't tell the truth. Never
so what do
know
we do?
Something...
How do we combat it? Vote the lot of them out. Start again. I don't know.
I never like to interfere in any country's politics. I always just say, you know...
Donald Trump has this week. He's interfered in our politics, made some comments.
Yeah.
So you can as well. You can as well.
Yeah, there are all sorts of problems with following that precedent. I would say precedent, not president. But look, I always just say, vote wisely and carefully, because wow, does it have repercussions.
100%. Douglas Murray, always great to chat to you. This evening you'll be at the Enmore and your tour of Australia. Fantastic, uncomfortable conversations. Absolutely brilliant. Great to see you again here on Outsiders, Douglas.